everybody. We're here with Dr. Peter Navario today. He's going to be chatting with us today.
Hi, I'm Peter Navario. I'm a professor of global health at NYU and executive director of a global health NGO called Health Right.
Now we're just going to set up the live feed on the laptop or computer, so 1 second.
Okay, it just popped up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so please send in any questions, comments, say hi at any point. So to start off, can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, what was that like?
Sure. I was born in Maryland, but I spent most of my childhood actually not too far from here in Connecticut. I grew up in southern Connecticut, and I went to college in Pennsylvania at Lehigh. I did my master's degree in global health policy at Yale, and then I started my PhD at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in London, and then got a job offer to move to Botswana and run to work on the very first rollout of HIV treatment in Botswana. So I kind of jumped at that opportunity. I moved to Botswana and put my PhD studies on hold, and then worked for another 5 or 6 years on various HIV treatment projects across sub-Saharan Africa. I think in total I've worked in 16 or 17 different countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And then I went back, and while I was there I finished my PhD in health economics at the University of Cape Town School of Economics. Then I moved back to the States after being abroad for about 7, 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a global health fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a foreign policy think tank based here in New York, for 2 years. And then I moved over to the UN. I was at the UN here in New York for 4 years, where I worked on various sort of high-level policy projects, including the 2011 political declaration on HIV. And I also was on the 2 technical committees that wrote the Sustainable Development Goals. So I was involved in the Sustainable Development Goal development process from the very beginning, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. There's so much there. Okay. One of my first questions is, why did you choose to do a health economics PhD?
It's a really good question. And actually it was kind of fortuitous that I did stop my PhD and go and work in the field for a few years, because when I started my work in the field, it was at a time where HIV treatment people were just talking about ways of making it accessible to people living in sub-Saharan Africa, which of course is the epicenter of the HIV, and continues to be the epicenter of the HIV epidemic. And what struck me in doing that work, as I'm a little bit of a policy wonk to begin with, and so studying economics is there's sort of a natural bridge to policy. So that was one of the reasons, just that sort of natural, my sort of attraction to policy and wanting to have sort of an area of expertise within sort of the policy space. But beyond that, through sort of my work in the field and also watching what was going on in terms of global movements and resource mobilization and HIV politics, I was really deeply impressed by the degree to which economists shaped the conversation around access to HIV treatment. Sometimes for the worse, but in many instances for the better. The person who I ended up doing my PhD with at the University of Cape Town is a professor whose name is Nicholas Natras. Nicholas an economist, and it was one of the very first people to testify, to do studies looking at the cost effectiveness, indeed the cost, to look at the degree of cost savings associated with providing HIV treatment to infected mothers to prevent transmission to their unborn child. And the government of South Africa for a period of time in the early 2000s was really reluctant to roll out, to provide that treatment for free. And so Nicholas' work demonstrated to the government that not only was this cost effective, but in fact it would save money. It would save the government money in the long term. And she testified, in front of Parliament and a whole bunch of government committees. and to sort of witness the role that she played in shaping policy and ultimately in shaping access to life-saving HIV treatment just sort of really struck me. And sort of so through my work, through my exposure to the work of people like Nicolai, I really felt like that was, you know, I felt like studying health economics was enormously appealing, and that I felt like ultimately, whether I was in HIV or in another field, another part of public health, that the degree would serve me well.
It seems like a lot of the work that you have done has been HIV/AIDS focused. Why did you choose going down that path?
I started, let's see, I was always sort of attracted to the HIV movement through the late 90s here in the United States. And I began at a relatively young age after I finished college volunteering in an HIV clinic in Washington, D.C. And I, you know, I think as a gay man, I felt very, I felt a sense of solidarity with the gay community and the struggle with HIV, access to care, access to treatment, stigma reduction, all of these issues. They were very sort of close to my heart. And that combined with sort of my natural affinity for travel and for the world sort of led me to and also I just grew up, you know, as I sort of came of age, professional age. I left college, I went to grad school. This was at a time when you know, the HIV epidemic was peaking in sub-Saharan Africa, and so there was a lot of attention going towards that, and so it was just sort of this confluence of factors that kind of led me to that. And it's, you know, HIV, working on HIV for, it's been, you know, sort of 15 years now, is a wonderful way, it's an incredible lens through which to view public health systems, because HIV is in so many ways influenced by economics, politics, social movements, as much as it is by health systems and access to medicines. So it really, I mean, most illnesses and diseases sort of sit at this nexus of all of these factors, right? But HIV, it's very explicit, it's sort of very explicit. So it's a great way to view the ways in which politics, economics, again, social movements, civil society, health systems, issues around intellectual property, to sort of see all of that and to see firsthand the ways in which all of those factors conspire either to exacerbate an epidemic or to ameliorate an epidemic is fascinating. It's an incredible lens. Also to see the engagement, you know, HIV changed global health in many ways, in profound ways. I mean, global health wasn't always the hot sort of topic that it is today. And a lot of that, I would argue, is thanks to the global HIV response and sort of the elevating of global health in the global consciousness of how central health is to economic well-being, and political stability, and national security. I mentioned earlier that I spent about 2 years with the Council on Foreign Relations. When I was, you know, in the late 90s, you would struggle to find a foreign policy think tank that had a fellow in global health. You know, that had fellows in nuclear non-proliferation and regional fellows, but you wouldn't find fellows in global health. Now, you can't find a think tank, a foreign policy think tank, that doesn't have a fellow in global health.
I feel like
it's really, what's that?
Almost in anything, there's something.
Yeah, it's really been elevated, and part of that is, you know, the very first UN Security Council resolution on a global health issue was on HIV, and it really elevated. It sort of clicked for people who were in the space that there is a connection between issues of national security and political stability and health, and it sort of drew that line, and so it had a profound effect on both sides, on politics. And also on public health as a field.
Thank you. That was a great explanation. I just see that there are questions.
Oh, are there questions?
Comments.
Also, I need to. How do I? share this on
Oh yeah, just
my. Do I just click here to
yeah,
share it on
just
my
share.
feed?
Yeah.
Oops. Save. Turn on live notifications.
Yeah, I think at the bottom, see share.
Oh, yeah, here we go. Sorry, I just want to share this on the page.
Yes. We're gonna make Dr. Navario famous.
Yay! Okay. So, questions.
Yeah. So I think if you exit that box,
Close this.
yeah. And now go down where you see the live feed.
Here.
A little bit lower. Is that one yours?
That's not me.
Refresh the page. And it should come up. A little bit lower.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
So, and you can
Sorry about
see,
that.
You can see if you click on it, there should be comments and
Where? Sorry. No. What do you want me to click?
let's see. Yeah. So see all. Now go down. Oh. Maybe it was the share that I saw.
Okay.
No. That's weird. The comment should be green. But let me check 1 sec. Yeah. Anyways, I guess I maybe I didn't see.
It's a rainy Friday morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the next question that I had was about your work with the UN.
I work at the UN, yeah.
Yes, UNA. How
Yeah.
long did you work there, and what kind of projects you worked on?
So I was at the UN, specifically at UNAIDS, which is this sort of UN's HIV coordinating body. It coordinates across 9 co-sponsoring agencies that all have HIV programs. So I worked here in New York, which is a small office. UNAIDS headquarters are in Geneva, right next to the World Health Organization. There are lots of UN headquarters in Geneva, as you know. So, but they have a small office here, and so I worked on, as I mentioned, high-level policy issues. The very first project that I worked on was an updated version of the political declaration on HIV. And so this was in 2011. In 2001, the UN issued its first political declaration on HIV, which said that the UN, which essentially stated that HIV was a global public health threat, and that countries were signing up to commit themselves to confront HIV globally. And so in 2011, 10 years later, and that original document written in 2001 said we'll come back 10 years later, we'll assess progress, and we'll recommit ourselves to politically to ending HIV. So I was part of the technical team that actually drafted what's called the zero draft, the initial draft that member states react to. And then there was a period of negotiations over a number of weeks where literally every sentence of the political declaration is examined by member states, negotiated, and then ultimately signed off on. So the first thing I did was work on that, and it was a great deal of it was very long nights. Negotiations would go till 2:30, 3 in the morning. You get up in the morning and start over again. It's a lot of work to sort of work through like literally every element. There are moments where an hour is spent on a sentence, for example. So it's arduous. It can be trying at times, but really interesting, and to sort of see how a political declaration like that comes together, how the roles that member states play and their perspectives on certain issues was really fascinating. Also to see that, I think one of the most instructive lessons that I had was that as we were writing this political declaration on HIV, this was my focus. So I played the role of technical advisor. We wrote the zero draft, and then I stayed in the room during the negotiations because the delegates who are negotiating the document aren't public health experts or HIV experts. So they will have questions as they go through, technical questions about content. And so my job was to sit there, and the delegates would say, well, we don't understand this, why is this in here, what is the relevance of this, are there other ways to address this? And so my job, along with a few other people, was to sit there and to answer questions and to advise member states. And so that's what we did. So it was interesting. It's also interesting to realize that at the UN, and this is true of all politics, when you're negotiating a particular document, you have to remember that that document is one of many documents that's being negotiated, or one of any number of political levers that different member states are trying to push forward. So it ultimately becomes a little bit of a game of horse trading, and for me that was really revelatory, that we're sitting here and my relatively naive approach was like, everybody wants to get the best possible political document here through this process, but in fact certain member states would hold out on a particular issue because they wanted another issue in a different process addressed by a member state, and they needed another country's vote to support them on another issue that was completely unrelated to this, except that they needed something from another member state. So that experience, sort of witnessing that kind of horse trading that goes on in the background, which is, again, true of all politics, was really, really fascinating and fun to be a part of.
And during these times, from your perspective, what were your, I guess, from your job position, were you supposed to be neutral? Were you
Yes.
kind of, okay.
Yeah, the job of a technical advisor in a process like that is to be completely neutral and to answer technical questions.
But you would think the member states would be too, right? And it seemed that wasn't always the case.
No, but the member states, have, they have a political agenda, right? And so, so that certainly came through in the negotiations, yeah. It was a really exciting process to be part of, and I think in the end the document that we came out with, we felt pretty good about. It bore little to no resemblance to the zero draft that we'd written, but that's how it goes in policy making.
And after that, you came to CGPH, NYU.
Yeah, so that was at the very beginning of that was sort of in the first year or so when I was at the UN, and then as I said, I spent a couple of years working on the Sustainable Development Goals.
Right.
So I participated in the two technical committees that ultimately produced the Sustainable Development Goals. That was an issue. That was a multi-year effort and involved many different sort of initiatives to get global feedback on what the goals should contain and what people's priorities were. There was a particular effort to get input from non-political bodies, from civil society in particular, to regional bodies to get their input on what the SDGs should look like. So that was a very long, it was different. The political declaration process was a much more sort of concentrated, I mean, there were late nights as I mentioned, but it was a much more concentrated process, whereas this was a multi-year process. And I think the Sustainable Development Goals in the end, one of the things that they succeeded, one of the ways in which they succeeded that the Millennium Development Goals didn't, was that they came up with a document that was really the product of very inclusive, I think as inclusive as you possibly could be, consultations. And so I think they were, in that sense, the SDGs were, remarkably different from the MDGs and particularly successful. I think the effort was made to be inclusive, and that confers a degree of legitimacy on the Sustainable Development Goals that the MDGs perhaps didn't quite have. The downside of the SDGs is that there are a lot more.
It's like 17, right?
There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals with, I think 56 or 59 sort of sub-targets, and then many more indicators beyond that. So it's a much broader document, and there are people who criticize it for that reason, that it's a little bit too broad. too inclusive, and that the downside of that is if it includes everything, then one could argue that it essentially includes nothing, like that it doesn't emphasize everything. And one of the things that people who like the Millennium Development Goals articulated was that because there were far fewer, there were just 8 Millennium Development Goals, and so it concentrated minds. And so it concentrated minds and it concentrated resources so that you could sort of devote political will and financial resources towards making progress on sort of more clearly circumscribed objectives. And the SDGs, as I said, it's a much broader, more inclusive agenda. It reflects the diversity of elements that contribute to global development and ultimately will lead to reductions in global poverty, which is the ultimate goal of that agenda. But it remains to be seen how effective it is as a policy document, as an agenda-setting document for countries, for regions, and for the world.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only now 2 years in, I believe, the SDG, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any progress, or do you think it's too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell. I think, I think what it does is for people, and if you look at a government and across the government, it does provide an agenda for each of the ministries of the department, so they can look at their own particular piece of the SDGs, and we'll see if that informs political agendas and priorities and spending priorities. It's a bit too soon to tell. There are questions about how to measure progress still. Indicator development is still going on, and of course the biggest question mark is how the achievement of the SDGs will be financed. And so, it to some degree will come down to money as well, and that's not at all clear, particularly when it comes to global health and development, where spending on global health, it's called development assistance for health, has been flat or slightly declining in the past few years, and there are fears that it could be cut further, particularly if, as the current U.S. administration has said, they cut in the proposed budget, they cut USAID by about a third. That would have significant repercussions across development assistance for health.
Yeah. What do you, bringing up the current administration, how do you think that's going to impact public health professionals?
It's really hard to say. We'll see what actually happens with the budget. The U.S. government's fiscal year is October through September, so we haven't yet, the new administration's, but we're still sort of operating on the last administration's budget. So we'll see what happens. Certainly a 30% cut to USAID would be devastating. Yeah. It would be really devastating, and we've already seen a freeze on spending for reproductive health, which I personally view as counterproductive. Spending on reproductive health is one of the best investments you can make in economic development. There are reams of data to show that. So that's concerning to begin with. My hope is that, and we're starting to see some of this, that other governments step up to fill the gap left by U.S. spending in reproductive health. And by the way, when as somebody who runs a global health NGO, when so the U.S. has frozen its contributions to UNFPA, which is the UN Population Fund, which focuses on women's health and reproductive health. So the U.S. government is no longer supporting UNFPA, and that has repercussions across the board. It doesn't just affect reproductive health. UNFPA works on other issues, but when a major donor like the U.S. Stops its funding, that reverberates across the whole organization. So just to give you an example, we have partnered with UNFPA in Ukraine, which, as you know, in the East is is sort of in the midst of a conflict with Russia and Russian-backed separatists, and we run a program that identifies identifies and refers women who are survivors of gender-based violence for medical services, for mental health care, and for different types of social services. And in a little over a year, we identified and referred more than 12,000 women who had survived gender-based violence. So those cuts, just as one example, there are unintended consequences that come with those sorts of cuts, and it doesn't just affect women's reproductive health directly, it also affects other programs like gender-based violence programs that UNFPA supports.
Yeah, that's really sad.
Does that mean?
Yeah, it would have came up.
Yeah. It's quiet up there today.
Yeah, I could have sworn I'd seen some earlier, but we'll see. Can you tell me a little bit more about the other projects that HealthRight is working on? I know you mentioned the one in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other ones going on?
Yeah, HealthRight currently works in 5 different countries around the world,
Okay.
Including here in the U.S. Here in the U.S., we have a program that works with immigrant survivors of torture who are coming to the United States to seek safe haven, and so we assist them, we link them to social services, mental health care, medical care, and help work with them to document their signs and symptoms of their abuse and torture, and help them as they pursue asylum or whatever form of immigration relief they're looking to do. We also work with unaccompanied minor children here in the United States, linking them to care. We have, we are about to launch a new reproductive health project in Kenya, which is exciting, in partnership with Rotary International. That is a furtherance of our work, and we work in a very rural part of Kenya called the North Rift. It's actually it's a well-known area in Kenya because it's where all the marathoners come from. They all come from this particular part of Kenya. It's sort of in the northwest corner of the country. And so we've been working there for about 11 years, and working on issues of women's health and increasing access to reproductive health care. And so our new project with Rotary will continue a lot of that work, and just as an example of some of the impact that we've seen between 2012 and 2014 in that 3-year period, in the counties where we've been working, we've seen the uptake of antenatal care services and women delivering in facilities double in just that 3-year period. So the work that we're doing there is incredibly important, and as you know, women who deliver in facilities they themselves have much better outcomes, and the babies have far better outcomes. So the goal is to get women to deliver in healthcare facilities, and we've been pretty successful, and so this work supported by Rotary will continue that. So we're really excited about that. We've been engaged in Vietnam for the last 7 or 8 years in a really sort of unique project, and this is a project that has worked to improve the health and well-being of orphans in Vietnam. So for a very long time, orphans in Vietnam lived in orphanages, and the government a number of years ago decided that they wanted to try to move orphans out of these sort of orphanage institutions. And so we piloted an intervention that is very much like foster care. It's sort of a foster care, kinship care hybrid. Kinship care is when an orphan or vulnerable child goes to live with a relative as opposed to a non-relative, which is foster care. So we piloted that. Nothing like it had existed in Vietnam before. It was enormously successful. It's since been scaled up by UNICEF and the government, the Vietnamese government nationwide. And so our role, while we've handed that particular project over to the government and to UNICEF, our role has been to continue to support building the social safety net for orphans and vulnerable children. So we've continued to do that work in Vietnam, building out a cadre of social workers who understand the particular vulnerabilities and needs of orphans and vulnerable children, healthcare needs, mental health care needs, educational needs, nutritional, housing, etc. And so we've been working in the social sector to help build out that infrastructure, so that there is the foster care kinship care system, but there's also sort of there's a safety net for these kids, which didn't exist previously. So that's the work that we've been focused on in Vietnam.
So Vietnam, Ukraine, US, and
we're
Kenya.
also in.
Questions are on the CGPH's page because I saw them check, and that's where the questions are.
Oh, there are questions on the
Ah.
CGPH page, but we're on the CGPH page.
We do have questions. We just have to figure.
Sorry.
No, I heard that in the feed, and I was like, questions are coming in.
Ah,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Alex.
So we're on the CGPH page.
Yeah, they should be there. Let's see. Ah, there they
There we
are. We found them.
Let's ignore that one. Go to this one first, maybe.
Yeah, so.
Related to Sarah, what is the relationship between NYU and HealthRight? Oh, okay, that's a really good question. And then a follow-up question from Josh is, how does the partnership benefit research? So the relationship, so this actually gets back to your question about what happened, what I did after the UN. So after 4 years at the UN, NYU started building an Institute of Global Health that would eventually become the College of Global Public Health. And so I was in discussions with the dean about joining the faculty, and HealthRight had approached NYU about a strategic partnership at the time.
Okay.
So the two conversations just happened to sort of coincide.
Ah.
And so the dean reached out to me knowing that I had a background in civil society work, that I'd spent many years working for NGOs. And she sort of pitched this idea that I would join the faculty, and it just so happened that HealthRight needed an executive director, and she would put me forward for the executive director role, and then I could interview with the board of directors, and if that worked out, if they liked me, then it would work out. So it did work out. So that started 3 years ago. And so the partnership with NYU is really built kind of around 3 pillars. The first and what I would say sort of central pillar is around the development of new projects. And so the idea being that HealthRight has, we've been around for 27 years, we have an extensive field presence, and so what we were trying to do is marry the relative strengths of each institution. So HealthRight's field presence and work on implementing interventions in the field married to the sort of wealth of expertise and research here at NYU, and bring the two together. So the idea is to take cutting-edge innovative research that NYU faculty are doing and either bring it to the field in the form of what's called implementation science, which is a type of research that looks at the best ways to introduce an intervention in a particular context so that it maximizes its chance for success.
Okay.
So HealthRight, for example, we don't do any clinical research. We're not in that space at all. The only research that we engage in would be considered operational research, look at how organizations or interventions function in the field, or as I say, implementation science, which is sort of translational. How do you take an intervention, how do you put it in a particular context and make it successful? So the opportunity to take NYU faculty research that is relevant to the work that HealthRight does, relevant to our work with marginalized populations in the field. I forgot to mention that earlier, that HealthRight's mission is to empower marginalized communities to live healthy lives. So we're very focused on populations that are really outside of the sort of traditional bounds of the health system. So these are folks who are really excluded, vulnerable, marginalized, and our job as an organization is to build those linkages to these communities. How can we link them to the health system? And how can we help them exercise their right to health care? So anyway, so the idea was to take NYU faculty research as appropriate and bring it to the field. Or to take research and based on research, develop an intervention and then test that intervention in the field in partnership with NYU faculty. So that's the center, that's the sort of the central and most important pillar of the partnership. We also have very different funding streams, and so our funders tend to be development agencies and foundations, and NYU's principal funders. Faculty will have foundation money, but most of their money will come from NIH. And so it's also an opportunity for each organization to tap into sort of new pools of resources and to sort of merge our sort of relative strengths, ultimately for the benefit of the communities that we're partnering with and that we seek to help. So that's one. The second area is around training and education, and so the idea here is that HealthRight would take interns, and we've been running an internship lab ever since the partnership started.
Specifically from CGPH, College of Public Health?
The majority come from College of Public Health.
Okay.
Certainly, so we run it all year round. We have a fall cohort, a spring cohort, and a summer cohort. The fall and the spring cohort are primarily NYU students, CGPH or other schools. Sometimes we have social work students. Sometimes we've had med school students, and we've had some undergrads. In the summer, it tends to be more of a mixed bag, and so we usually have a few NYU students, but we've had students from lots of different schools. We've had a lot of students from Pomona College outside of LA.
Yes.
We've had students from Michigan. We've got students from Case Western, from Wesleyan, a bunch of different colleges. So our summer cohort tends to be a little bit more institutionally diverse. So that's one aspect, and I think at this point over the last 3 years, I don't know exactly, but HealthRight has probably hosted somewhere between 35 and 50 NYU interns. And the cool thing about interning at HealthRight is we're a small enough NGO that the interns really get deeply engaged in the work that we do. It's not making copies and sort of getting coffee. It's really an internship where the interns play a critical role in doing background research, doing for grant proposals, doing all the sort of what we call intelligence capture about funding opportunities, partnerships, that kind of thing. They help us with fundraisers, so some of that's fun. So they're really communications. They help us maintain our social presence, and so they play an important role in sort of what the organization does. The other way in which the partnership has really, I think, borne fruit is that we've taken some of our field experience that HealthRight has and turned it into courses at NYU, which is really particularly exciting. So the first course that we developed was on migration, health, and human rights. And that is a course, it's available online actually through CGPH. And it draws directly from our field experience in working with migrant populations. And it is very practically oriented. What are the demands of working with some of these populations? What are their particular needs? What are the solutions that are out there? What's being done currently? Where are the gaps? So you really get sort of it's like having sort of a front row view of what's going on with different migrant populations. So we've developed that course, and it ran for the first time last semester, and it was very successful. We got a lot of great feedback on that. So that's one way. The other thing that we're about to launch is a certificate training program in health and human rights, which we're also very excited about. And so this will be a 15-credit certificate that will prepare people to understand as they go out into the world how to employ rights-based approaches in the work that they do. So that's really the focus. Again, practically sort of skills-based training on how do health and human rights interact? How do they intersect?
Right.
How can we ensure that the public health work that we're doing reflects, as I said, a rights-based approach? That human rights are sort of core to the way people practice public health, and that's the point. So we've jointly developed that also between HealthRight and NYU, and we're hoping to roll that out. It's actually sitting with the state for accreditation at the moment, and if accreditation, which we anticipate will be should be received in the not too distant future. We'll officially roll it out in early 2018,
Okay.
but students will be able to take credit toward the certificate starting in the fall.
Oh, okay. So if somebody were to start this fall,
Yep.
they can start.
They can start
Working
the
towards
certificate. Correct. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
I think there's another question.
Let's see here. Ooh, the camera. I know this. How does the partnership benefit research? It's a good question too. So I think the exposure that faculty get to the field sites where we work raise a lot of tangible, pressing questions that those communities are facing that faculty might not have previously been exposed to. So it's a great opportunity as we engage with faculty and they engage with our work in the field. I think it opens up that kind of exposure opens up a whole new world of questions, and it enables faculty to sort of see their research in context, which is pretty cool. And as I say, it leads to new questions. I as part of my role, I also do a little bit of research. I actually just completed a study in Ukraine looking at HIV risk among displaced young adult, internally displaced people, and trying to understand how displacement and conflict influences HIV risk in the context of the current conflict in Ukraine. Ukraine has HIV prevalence varies significantly by region, but overall it has one of the highest HIV prevalence in Eastern Europe, up there with Russia, and so HIV is a significant consideration. And so we're doing a little bit of research. So sometimes the research informs the programs, and then hopefully the idea is that as we engage in research in the field, and we see that research sort of in its context, it leads to new research questions. So that's a good question. I didn't finish with the third pillar of the Health Right NYU partnership. So the first again is new projects.
Mm-hmm.
The second is around training and education, and the third is around thought leadership. So we collaborate with NYU to bring speakers. We've hosted book launches jointly with NYU, between Health Right and NYU, on book launches on topics that are relevant to the work that we do, or bring in speakers that are that sort of illuminate topics that relates to marginalized populations and public health.
Okay.
So those are the three pillars of the partnership. So I would also emphasize that both institutions remain independent. We have our own board of directors. CGPH is obviously part of NYU. This is a fairly unique partnership in that there are a lot of academic NGOs. Those academic NGOs tend to be part of academic institutions as opposed to the way we've arranged this. So we've structured this in such a way that Health Right remains independent from CGPH. We share information, we share resources where possible, but the MOU is really around generating innovative new projects and providing educational and training opportunities to the NYU community.
I mean, that sounds like amazing. I've had friends that have interned here, and it seems like it's a great experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. Having been a student, having done internships in the past, I think it's a really, as I say, it's a very immersive sort of internship experience.
Yeah.
And we're small enough that you can, as an intern, you can see all of the different moving parts of an organization and how they sort of work together.
And I was hoping I could get a tour of your office
Sure.
/ maybe Health Right.
Sure.
So we're gonna walk around a little bit.
Okay.
So you tell me where you would like to start.
Oh, so this is my office. The office is a little bit messy because we just moved in a couple of weeks ago, so there are boxes and we're still in the midst of unpacking. So we're here temporarily for a year and a half or so until the new school of public health opens up just up the street. So as soon as that opens, then it'll be nice for the School of Public Health to all be in the same space. And the other nice thing is that Health Right the intention is to have Health Right co-located within the school which is exciting too. So then it'll just make sort of interaction between the faculty and health rights staff that much easier. This is my bookshelf. I'm particularly excited. I have a couple of summer books to read. One is this book. This came out a little bit ago, Why Nations Fail. It's been on my to-read list for quite some time. This one's relatively new. I'm a little bit of a global health governance wonk, policy wonk, and so this is a new book by Chelsea Clinton and Debbie Sridhar that came out a few months ago, and looks to be really good, looking at the institutions of global health governance and the degree to which they're succeeding or failing us in this day and age, and then lots of cost-effectiveness books and HIV books and stuff like that. And then the books that I use for teaching around global health disparities, case studies, policy analysis, etc. And then you have the flag of Nepal, where we have operations.
That's the fifth country.
And that's the fifth country, right? Exactly.
And is that?
And that's my family. Yeah.
So, based on your personal experiences and your professional trajectory, how do you think that has influenced your teaching? Oh, I think it affects my teaching sort of in profound ways.
I think one of the advantages, I've spent the bulk of my career in the field, and I don't just mean in rural health, in health systems in low-income countries and rural health clinics and ministries of health. I've done all of that, so I've also seen how health systems work in a lot of low-income countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. From the inside, I spent a year seconded to the Ministry of Health in Botswana, for example, and was deeply engaged in sort of the policy side of rolling out HIV treatment in Botswana. But also my work at the UN and the Council on Foreign Relations, looking at sort of high-level policy and interacting with those folks. And so I think, I don't just teach from sort of academic and the empirical literature, which is critically important, but I think because I've spent so much time in the field, I bring sort of that practical perspective to the classroom. I also, I'm able to, a big part of the global health policy course that I teach is bringing in leaders in global health, and I have those relationships largely because I spent so much time working in a variety of places, and bringing in a diversity of perspectives, folks who are from civil society or government or the private sector, or government, to talk about global health, talk about global health issues with my students. And so I think that's also sort of a benefit of having spent a life, the past 15 years, sort of working in the field. And so, having an opportunity like I do, running Health Right, teaching at NYU, enables me to continue to do that. I still have this sort of this practical, I'm still engaged in implementation and programs in the field, while also doing a little bit of research and teaching. And so, I have this incredible opportunity to do all of the things that I kind of love and am very passionate about. So I feel pretty lucky to be able to do all those things.
Anything else we have in your office? Should we move?
I have some great pictures, but they're not, they're all still wrapped. They're also still unwrapping.
Is that from somewhere specific?
Yeah, that's just, it's a basket from my travels.
Yeah.
So yeah, unfortunately I don't have my paraphernalia out.
It's okay. Maybe next time.
Yeah. Do you want to see if there are any other...
It says, how does global public health work affect specifically American public health?
Well, I think it's, just in terms of thinking about, as you consider, I guess I'm struggling with the question because implicit in the question is that they're different, and I don't see them as different at all, and you need only look as far back as the 2014 Ebola outbreak in West Africa to sort of see that and see how an infectious disease outbreak like that reverberates so quickly around the world and has profound implications around the world. So these notions, this is, implicit in the term global health is this notion that boundaries are essentially irrelevant in public health. Disease travels with unprecedented speed around the world, and I don't just mean infectious diseases. I mean, quote unquote, chronic diseases that come as a result of sedentary lifestyles or eating habits. These are all part of these sort of all emanate from the globalized world that we live in, and so Americans' health is profoundly bound up in the health of people in Liberia and people in Vietnam and people in Nepal, and so the premise of the question, I mean, the answer is that they're profoundly connected, and this is why it's critical that in our health leadership, not only that we ensure that people in this country have access to high quality health care, but it behooves us to ensure that people in all around the world have access to high quality health care. They're mutually reinforcing, and they're by no means separate. They're deeply linked.
Cool. Yeah. Do you want to take a seat, or do you want to?
I didn't know if we were going out.
Oh, I mean, we can if you want to.
Well, there's.
Or we could come. We can also come back to that. So, I actually can see them now on this.
Okay.
So
there we go. There's one of my students who's in Nepal just sent a note. So we have a CGPH master's student who we've sent to Nepal to do some research she's looking at mental health issues among Tibetan refugees in Nepal in a clinic, and she's sort of based out of a clinic there that we're partnered with. So she has a question: where do you see the future of healthcare and health economics given the budget cuts, and as an academic, public health professional, executive director, how do you manage all of your unique roles? I am not certainly an expert on having spent sort of my career in low middle income country health systems. I'm not an expert in the U.S. healthcare system. I certainly have a reasonably good understanding of how things work. I think there's a lot of uncertainty currently about what's going to happen with healthcare in the United States, and we're just going to have to wait and see. There seems to be a lot of confusion in Congress, and it's not clear that we're going to have much of it's not clear what's going to happen. So I'm not going to engage too much on that one. I will just say that other countries have managed to provide universal coverage while keeping costs down, and I think it's entirely possible in this country, but it requires a great deal of political will and wrangling of lots of entrenched interests that is quite difficult. In terms of managing all my unique roles, it's a very good question. I wear many hats. I wear the NYU hat, I wear the health right hat, I wear a research hat, I wear a teaching hat, and I mean, at the end of the day, I work a lot. But I really enjoy it, and it's always interesting. It's always challenging. One day rarely looks like the next, and I have we have a lot of great staff at HealthRight, and that makes it a lot easier. So that's a good question.
Do you see? I see that with HealthRight working to build its portfolio, what are some new projects the organization is pursuing, and what opportunities do interns have to work on these projects?
So we actually have our grant pipeline is actually really sort of chock full. Where we've got we're currently one project that I think is quite interesting that we're currently implementing is we're working. I mentioned we work with marginalized last mile populations who are typically outside the scope of the public health system. So we work with incarcerated populations in Ukraine, as an example. And so we have a project that's funded by Elton John AIDS Foundation to work with women and adolescents who are in the penitentiary system. And we've applied for a new grant to do some more work in the prison system in Ukraine, and to actually work not just on doing HIV prevention and care work in the prison system. It's actually HIV prevention and care, TB and hepatitis C prevention and care work, but also to work on broader health system reform within the penitentiary system and help the Ukrainian government achieve that. So that's quite exciting, and that's a project that we've bid on, and we'll see how that goes. We are trying to get. We've piloted an intervention, a maternal health intervention in Nepal called Maternal Near Miss Reviews, which instead of focusing exclusively on postmortems when a woman dies in childbirth, this intervention sort of adds an additional perspective, looking at all of the cases of near misses, where a woman has a complication but survives. And this intervention, we feel, has a great deal of promise because it gives a lot more data than a postmortem. And the reason it gives a lot more data is because far more women survive complications than die from them. So if you can institute a system where when a woman has a complication, if you review all of the cases where women have complications and you look at the reason, the drivers of those complications, the causes of those complications, then you can act more quickly to address the causes. And so whether it's operationally related or behaviorally related, you can understand what is driving the incidence of complications during childbirth and try to eliminate them. And you have a lot, as I say, you have a lot more data than if you just do postmortems. And so we piloted that in one of the counties where we work in rural Nepal, and we're looking to bring that intervention to Kenya. Our Kenya colleagues feel like it has a great deal of promise there. We've developed a new concept for providing respectful LGBT care. One of the communities that we're concerned about are LGBT communities in some of the countries that we work in, where their rights are not fully recognized by governments. And still trying to, within that context, work at getting them access to healthcare services. And this intervention would create safe spaces for LGBT individuals in the health system. So we're also working on getting that up and running. So those are a few examples of new projects that we've got in the pipeline and that we're hoping will be funded.
Yes, hopefully.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit,
Sure.
but just because it does seem like you are very busy, wearing a lot of hats, what do you do for fun on your downtime?
What do I do for fun? I do although I've fallen off a bit lately, I've been doing triathlons for the last 5 years.
Wow.
So I really enjoy when I have time to train. I haven't had time to train this summer, but for the past 5 years I've been doing triathlon. So and the New York City Triathlon is actually coming up. Unfortunately, I haven't been training, so I'm not going to do it. But so I do triathlons, which means I run, bike, and swim a lot, which is great. I go to the theater. I really enjoy theater. I went last night to see a great play called Oslo, which won the Tony for Best Play this year. It was really very powerful. So yeah, I travel. I love to travel. Even though I travel for work, I still love to travel and see different parts of the world. And I'm excited this year because I've actually, for all the travel that I've done, I've never been to Southeast Asia. And so I'm going for the first time later this year, and I'm for fun and to be a tourist, and I'm excited about that. Because I travel a lot, but I don't often get to be a tourist.
Right.
And so I'm doing that. I'm also going to Cuba later this summer as a tourist, which will be really fun.
I just came back from Cuba.
Oh, okay.
Where in Asia are you going?
I'm going to go to Thailand.
Oh, okay. And somebody said...
And probably to Vietnam. See our
okay.
place. That'll be a work trip though.
Somebody just commented, he's basically Superman. Melissa Kirsch.
Yes.
And in addition to the places that you will be going to, what is another place you'd love to go to that you haven't been to yet?
That's a really good question. For I would really like to go to India. I haven't been to India, and I think that's high on the list. I've also always wanted to go to Stockholm, and in Sweden.
Sweden,
Yeah.
yes.
And so I haven't. So I would put those two on the high on the list.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in New York, what's some of your favorite restaurants?
Favorite restaurants in New York. So I live in Harlem. I live up by City College in Hamilton Heights.
Okay.
So up there's a place that we really like called Maison Harlem, which is sort of like African French bistro, which is great. Yeah, I really like that place. What else do I really like? There's a place right over here nearby called Vic's that we really like. And there's a place in Soho, actually, where I got married called 100 Acres that we really like, which is actually a sister restaurant to Vic's.
Okay.
I like the Momofuku restaurants, the Asian fusion thing.
Yes.
David Chang stuff. Yeah.
Some of your must-do activities in New York.
Must do. Oh boy.
In your opinion, right?
Yeah, I mean, Central Park is a must-do. I really like that. I think for me, when I'm a tourist, I'm not hugely attracted to typical tourist sites. I like to go to any place and sort of experience how the locals live. So it's about sitting in cafes, going to restaurants that are popular with locals, going to the parks and the places the locals hang out. Just sort of to get and more visiting sort of interesting neighborhoods and seeing bits and parts of the city that yeah, so I think seeing Central Park is great. I mean, that's not to say that you shouldn't go see the Statue of Liberty. It's a moving experience. I think taking a ferry or a boat ride around the city, seeing the city from the water is always fun and a unique perspective. I recommend doing that.
Somebody's asking, what's your favorite coffee shop in New York?
Oh boy, that's a really tough question. I love coffee shops. I really love espresso. In these new offices across the street, there's a place called La Colombe, which is really great. They have great coffee. There's a little cafe also around the corner in a restaurant called Lafayette. In the front of the restaurant, they have a cafe. They have great coffee at Lafayette. Up by me in Harlem, we go to a great little place called Manhattanville Coffee, which is on like 141st and Bradhurst.
Do you have, or what's your favorite genre of music or artist?
Favorite, I like musical theater a lot. So as dorky as that sounds, I listen to a lot of musical theater. I really, really love opera. I listen to a lot of opera. I go to Lincoln Center whenever I can. It's a really special place. Yeah.
Do you have any TV shows that you watch? Or series, movies?
Yes. What do I like? I like the new BBC Sherlock Holmes with Benedict Cumberbatch. I think is really great and entertaining. I enjoy that. I just started watching The Handmaid's Tale, which is terrifying. I like sort of murdery mystery type things. I love The Golden Girls. I mean, I think one of the most therapeutic things I can do is get home after a stressful day and just put on The Golden Girls and sort of chuckle along. I find that very therapeutic.
Shakespeare or Oscar Wilde? question.
Who is that from?
Marine. Yeah. See, now that I'm behind the camera, I can see them
Oh, you
coming
can
up
see them
as
coming
they
up.
as they're coming. Yeah.
Right. Lately I like reading sort of nonfiction. I'm enjoying more sort of nonfiction type stuff, and I enjoy seeing Shakespeare. I wouldn't say I enjoy. Reading a play would not be my a Shakespeare play would not be mine. Deb Schwartz.
Yeah. Tell us about being a triathlete and some of your favorite experiences running in the places you work abroad.
I actually have a hilarious story from Kenya. As I mentioned, we work in a remote part of Kenya where all the Kenyan marathoners are from, and so I went for a run one day while I was there, and I ran sort of down a long dirt road into a village, and two funny things happened to me along the way. The first was that I passed an old man who was walking his dog, and he sort of saw me as I approached, and as I passed him, he said, "Hey Mzungu, why are you running so slow?" Which I thought was, so Mzungu is slang for white person, and I thought that was pretty funny. He was like walking with a cane, but obviously, and I mean, at the risk of sounding immodest, I'm not a slow runner. Actually, of the three, it's my best event, but I am certainly slow compared to some of the local. I'm sure the local Kenyan athletes. It's also at very high altitude, so it's running there when you're not used to running at altitude is a challenge. So anyway, that was the first thing that happened, and then a little bit later on in the same run, I went through this village, and this little kid who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, who was hanging out he was just sort of hanging out along the side of the road, wearing sort of army boots, saw me, and he ran up to me really friendly, and then he ran with me in army boots. He was 7 or 8 years old. He paced me the entire time and chit-chatted without losing his breath for probably half a mile. And it just sort of stunned me that this little kid in army boots was running alongside of me on this dirt road, no trouble keeping up whatsoever, and chit-chatting, not even breathless chit-chatting. So that was a fun experience. Yeah.
What's your mile time?
Oh boy, this is getting
Oh
specific.
no. This is my question. Just because I like running too.
So in I haven't done just a mile, but if I do an Olympic triathlon, which is a 10K run, which is 6.2, then my pace is usually around 6:45, around 6:45,
I mean, that's
6:45, 6:50.
Alright. And if you had a superpower, what would it be and why?
Oh. I just saw the Wonder Woman movie, so that she has some pretty cool superpowers. It's predictable. It would be to fly. Yeah, that's easy. I love flying. I love flying in planes. I love that perspective of the Earth. So I would go with flying.
Have you competed in the Spartan or Tough Mudder races?
No, I haven't. I'm not hugely attracted to them. Because I'll tell you why. The idea of being wet and shocked has I have no, that's not I'd much rather sort of experience endurance discomfort in doing a triathlon, and I am curious about doing it. I would do one if it did not involve electric shocks, and if it's warm and it doesn't involve cold water, because I don't like cold water.
Me and Alex are planning on doing one in a couple of months.
Oh,
that's why.
Gotcha.
Can you tell us a fact that most people don't know about you?
Well, I think the triathlon one was probably one that people don't know. Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm a total architecture and design buff, and I have dreams of being a house flipper one day.
Oh, I love watching those shows. Do you have a guilty pleasure?
A guilty pleasure.
Yes.
Donuts.
Ah.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you.
love a fried carb, fried sugary carb.
Always. And
Yep.
now just to bring it back to CGPH and NYU, can you tell me about some of your favorite experiences working here?
You know, it's been so interesting being part of a college of public health as it's being built. And so having the opportunity to sort of be on all of the various committees that are trying to create an infrastructure for the college, an overall architecture for the college, and having the opportunity to give input into the direction, both sort of thematically and content-wise, has been really exciting. It's not that often that you sort of get to be involved in building something of this significance, and for me that's been, I think that's been really cool. It's difficult, it's challenging, but it's also, it's also really fun to sort of to be in that position, to have to be able to give your input and sort of help shape what we hope will eventually be one of the top schools of public health in the country and if not the world. So being on the ground floor of that has been super exciting. Interacting with the students has been great. Global health is hugely popular. I get to meet lots of different students, and we have a very extremely diverse student body here from all over the world. That's really cool. I really enjoy that. It also makes class discussions really interesting. People always have perspectives and unique perspectives, and I'm really excited. I have my first PhD student starting this fall. I'm really excited about that, and sort of working with her. So lots of sort of new and exciting opportunities, and so for me, like, it's the right balance of sort of well-tread territory for me career-wise and doing new stuff. So it's great. Yeah.
And we have a question about what are the current approaches for funding in light of current government priorities?
Yeah, so in terms of running an NGO, one of the the job of an executive director at an NGO is, there's a piece of it that's kind of sort of strategic and thought leadership, but ultimately you spend a lot of your time worrying about finances and trying to secure grant funding and donations and contributions, and I would say I spend a lot of my time doing that. So I think, one of the, in light of the fact that there may be, first of all, I would say that as a relatively small NGO in global health, the cuts, if there were to be cuts to global health and development, it would adversely impact us. But frankly, the bigger threat that we face as a relatively small NGO is the sort of hegemony of some of the larger NGOs. So the NGO space has become, as I would argue, as unequal as sort of income in society has been in this country and in many others. And so there are a handful of extremely large NGOs that consume a significant amount, 50-60% of all of the resources that are available out there. And so the global health architecture in many ways is as big a threat to us as a cut in funding. And so some of what I do is to advocate for change. I was just at a UN meeting the week before last where we were brought in to provide guidance to member states on equity in the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the points that I made was that there's this an incredible structural inequity within civil society, among civil society organizations that are in the global health space. This is a huge issue for us. But I mean, I think the strategy for us doesn't change in terms of securing financial resources for our work. It is still having a diverse range of funders. That's the best way to sort of secure, to provide financial stability, but it's also to secure some significant grants from bilateral development agencies. So if it's not USAID, then figuring out ways to get money from the British government, which is their development agency is called DFID or DFID, the Germans, the Scandinavians, the European Union. We do have some European Commission money, and so ensuring a broad range of funders. But really, it's important to get bilateral donors like USAID and like the European donors, because they provide more indirect support. They provide with their grants. They provide more unrestricted funds that I can use to make strategic investments in the work that we do, whereas smaller foundations provide very little unrestricted money with their grants, if any. And so all of the money goes directly to programming, which is it's not that we don't want the money to go to programming, we do, but we also need money to run the organization, to develop innovations, to hire really smart, really talented people who are going to ensure that the work has impact.
Awesome. And then I was hoping we could do like a quick tour of HealthRight to wrap up the video.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
All right, I'll follow and you lead.
So this is the office.
Okay, so
You can see all the boxes. We're still unpacking. Here, this is sort of the new intern wall. So you can see here a couple of our interns.
You can say hi.
This is Josh.
Hi, Josh.
How are you?
I'm Sarah.
And Sarah.
Okay.
And here we have, this is Talia.
Hi.
We're doing a Facebook Live thing, Talia.
Okay.
Talia works in our Human Rights Clinic, which works on with survivors of torture here in the United States. Incredibly important work. And this is Alex. Alex just graduated from NYU with her MPH, and she runs our internship program, and she coordinates our business development work.
Okay.
So,
Applications are open soon to apply.
for the fall.
Email Alex.
Email Alex for internship applications for the fall. And unfortunately, we've got a couple staff who are on vacation this week, and a couple, So that's it for who's in the office today.
Thank you.
So that's our office.
Yeah, and any last words of wisdom and or advice to anyone thinking about public health?
I think one of the things, I'm thrilled to see that public health as a field has really sort of exploded in terms of interest from young people. You're seeing majors in public health, which when I was in college was never an option, and so I think it's an incredibly rewarding, worthy field, whether you're working on domestic health issues here in the United States, or you're working globally, or you're working across boundaries. It's an incredibly rewarding, fun field, and I feel fortunate to have found it and landed where I've landed. So thanks for the opportunity to chat today.
Yes, thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you.
time
And
out of your
thanks
day.
to everyone for their questions.
All right.